Good evening, folks. Welcome. And today we have Kip Adams from National Deer Association talking to us about some deer biology and helping us get a better understanding of whitetails as we know them. We're going to let folks roll in here for a couple more minutes before we kick things live. But Kip, what's happening over on the East Coast? What's the latest at NDA? What have you been up to?
All things are good. Summer's quickly coming to a close now. All our fall food plots are in and are doing great. Boy, it's fun to watch those bucks in their velvet, still in those bachelor groups, which is nice. Man, kids are almost ready to go back to school, which is that is heartbreak in my house. That my young son is not ready for summer to be over or to have to head back to school. But things at NDA are good, and things at the Adams household are good.
Nice. Yeah, what a shot. Kids don't want to head back to school. Although, 20 years from now, they'll look back and they'll think a little bit differently about those school days. I know I do.
For sure. I guess the fact that they're back to school means that archery season is just around the corner for us. So that's the silver lining.
Absolutely. All right. We got a few hundred people in here. So for everybody in here, across the bottom of your screen, you have a little toolbar. The chat is a great place to say, hey, I'm Jared from Wisconsin. Talk about what you've been seeing on trail camera, shoot it back and forth with the other folks here. Please just keep it cordial. A lot of folks in here. And then if you have questions that you would like me to facilitate to Kip to be answered, please put them in the Q&A. It's just a lot easier for us to separate questions from just general commentary if you keep those things separate in the chat and Q&A. We'll also be doing a giveaway about halfway through, 3/4 of the way through this webinar. We are giving away a seat to Deer Steward 1 from NDA. So that is going to encompass a whole plethora of things that if you are a deer hunter, a land manager, care about whitetails in any capacity, it is going to be wildly informative and just a great class that you guys are going to want to check out. And of course, if you don't win that, it is always available at NDA's website. And actually, this presentation is partly pulled straight from Deer Steward 1. So that is the beauty of these webinars, this series that we've been doing with NDA, is they're giving away some of that paywalled information to you guys through these webinars. So definitely go check that out. If you are not the winner tonight, we'll also be giving away some onX swag. But without further ado, Kip, I'm going to turn it over to you to give us all some education here tonight.
All right. That sounds great, Jared. I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a good time. So welcome, everybody. And as Jared said, my name is Kip Adams from the National Deer Association. The talk I'm going to give tonight is deer biology and behavior. And this is right from our Deer Steward 1 video series. So we cover all aspects of deer and habitat and hunter management in that. I'm lucky to be able to give this presentation. This is a fun one for sure. We're going to talk a bunch about why deer do what they do, some of the movement patterns during the course of the year, and just some of the real cool stuff about deer. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. One of the neat things about deer is we know that it ranges from southern Canada to South America. So it's huge distribution. So wherever you are in the whitetails range, the deer that you have is the same species. Bunch of different subspecies, though. Just in the U.S., there's 38 recognized subspecies, although you know what? They probably are not actually 38 different ones. Deer have been restocked from different parts of the U.S. to other states. Probably some of those deer are the same species. So suffice to say, multiple subspecies, maybe not quite 38, but definitely some different subspecies that we have throughout the United States. Big differences in size of these animals. Whitetails up in Canada can be over 350 pounds. At the other end of the spectrum, we get down near Key West, the key deer, they're going to max out about 75. So huge size differences. And it's really a result of, what they need to be able to survive. As you move north, in general, whitetails get larger and their appendages are more compact. And this just allows them to survive in more severe environments. Helps them save energy, helps them save heat. And this is how they can live in the northern U.S. and well up into Canada. We know from a movement standpoint, the deer are crepuscular. And that's a fancy word for just saying that, they move most at dawn and dusk. Hunters are pretty well aware of this. This is when we typically see most movement. The graph I'm showing you here shows deer on the The x-axis is time of day. The y-axis shows how far they're moving. And basically it follows them during the summer, all the way through the fall, the rut, and into the winter. And it varies a little bit how much they move during daylight hours, but you can see it's very clear. In general, they have a big peak of movement right about dawn and another one right about dusk. So doesn't mean that you can't see them moving during the day. They certainly do. They have to get up to feed. You know, they're going to get up to relieve themselves, but definite peaks at 2 times. This is partly due to how good their eyes are in lower light situations, how they have an advantage over predators, but partly of just how, how they've evolved to be able to feed and be successful at staying alive. We know that deer are individuals. There's a lot of GPS collar studies out there now all over the whitetails range. So we have literally millions and millions of data points on deer. And what they show us is that, you know what, some bucks and does move a lot, some not very much. Some bucks and does have really big home ranges, while others have small ones. Some are more dominant, some are more submissive. So what it just shows is, they all have their own personality. So in this case, it's very similar to humans. Each of us has a little bit different personality. Deer are exactly the same way. You can take a look at this buck here, and it just looks like this guy has bad intentions on his mind. So, some deer just tend to be like this. They tend to be a little more bullyish than others, maybe a little more aggressive than others. So makes it kind of neat that everybody is a little different and all have their own personality. Well, since deer are prey species, this really plays into some of the way that they're built. And rather than a predator like us or like a coyote or a mountain lion that has eyes in the front of the body, deer's eyes are set to the side, and it allows them to detect movement at a much wider range than us. We can see at about 180 degrees. That's about it. Deer can see all the way around to 300 degrees, so they can see almost all the way around behind them. This is why if a deer's looking away from you at times and you move, they can still pick up that movement. This is what they need to be able to avoid any predators from the 2-legged or the 4-legged kind, and they are really, really good at seeing that movement. Their nose, though, is even better, and this is their number one scent that keeps them alive. Their sense of smell is so much better than ours, and this is what they use to find food. This is what they use to avoid predation. This is what they use to communicate with each other and tell individuals. So really, really highly developed sense of smell. From the ear standpoint, they can hear about the same as we can. However, those big ears that they can cup and rotate in different directions, it actually allows them to funnel that sound in a little better than us. So that's why you can see deer at times, one ear's forward and they'll rotate the other one back. They are collecting sound just to help give them a little better idea of exactly what they're listening to. And lastly here, from a prey species standpoint, they eat very fast. So when you're a kid and your mom told you to slow down eating, well, no doe ever told a fawn that. They're designed to eat very quickly while they're in the open, get back into good cover, then they can bed and then digest that food. And essentially what they do is they get to cover, they will regurgitate that food and then chew it a lot better. And at that time, get real small pieces that can then pass through the 4 chambers of their stomach. But the fact that they're able to do this allows them to maximize the amount of time that they can be in cover, minimize the amount of time that they're available to be preyed upon. Well, they have 2 different coats that they use, and they actually will molt twice a year. Their summer coat is red. This is what we're still seeing right now. And the hairs are very thin. They're really light, and it's designed to shed heat. They don't want to be holding any of this heat in. They want to get rid of it, be as comfortable as possible. So it's essentially like taking off their jacket. Well, then they will molt that into their winter coat. And this is either a gray or a brown, depending on where you are in the whitetails range. Some of them appear more grayish and some more brownish, but this coat is much thicker and it's a lot heavier. And this really holds the heat in. And take a look at this deer in front. This is pictures from northern Pennsylvania. This is late August or early September. See, this deer is still in velvet. He's just starting to shed his velvet. He has now molted into his winter coat. So it's brown, but it hasn't gotten as thick as it will in another month or so. So once we get into the full winter, now it looks like this. It's very heavy. This really holds in heat. And in fact, they are so good at holding in heat that deer can bed in snow and not even melt that snow out, or at least melt a very small bit of that out. They literally can hold that much of their heat in, allow them to trap it. So this is how they survive winter in really, really severe environments. And in fact, deer are far more social than many people realize. They are exchanging information all the time. They are communicating in different ways than we do, but they are extremely social animals. And it all starts with a color. And these are what we're talking about tonight are white-tailed deer. And many deer enthusiasts know the underside of the tail is white. But this whole white here is actually way more than just a tail color. And it's actually more than just the tail that is colored. If you take a look at this deer, his underside of the tail is white, his whole rump is white, his whole belly is white all the way up through. And this is designed specifically to capitalize on how deer see. Deer see really good into the blue wavelengths and in low light situations. And what that means is that like dawn or dusk, when we have a hard time seeing, deer can see really, really well. And they especially can see white colors extremely well. So this coloration is designed to help them stay in line or travel together in low light situations to get to feeding areas or to avoid predators. So if we take a look at this next shot, look at the deer behind. He's looking forward. The deer in front's got its tail flared out. You can see all that white. As that deer is running away, that's like a big beacon shining. So it's extremely easy for any deer behind to see that, to quickly be able to follow. So the white and white-tailed deer is way more than just what their tail looks like. Well, from a deer end, it all starts with fawns. So let's start there, and we'll talk about fawns and then does, and then we'll work our way up to bucks. If you take all the fawns born in whatever state that you're watching from tonight, about half of them are going to be doe fawns and about half will be buck fawns. It might not be exactly 50-50, but it's really close. And if you take a look at this deer on the left, see how rounded that head is? That is a doe fawn. Every doe fawn has a rounded head. Every adult doe has a rounded head. The deer on the right is a buck fawn, and you can see his pedicles have just started, those little bumps. That's what his future antlers are going to grow from. But even if you can't see those, look how flat his head is. Every buck fawn has a flat head. So if you see an antlerless deer like this, even if you can't see the body or tell what it is, by looking at whether the head is rounded or flat, you can distinguish whether you're looking at a doe or a buck. You can do this in pictures, on videos, or certainly any deer that you see in the field. Well, when fawns are born, they're hiders. We often think of moose calves as ones that want to be with their mothers, and the cows can be very aggressive at protecting them. Bear cubs, they often climb trees, black bear cubs anyway, at the scent of danger. Mothers often will run away because they know the cubs are safe there. Well, fawns are hiders. They can't climb trees. The mother often doesn't stand there and defend them. Sometimes she certainly will, but in many cases, fawns survive by getting away from their mother and just go in bedding somewhere. They do have scent. It's not true that they're scentless, but they have less scent than their mother. So by her sending them off to hide, she's not taking her scent with them, which makes it harder for predators to be able to find them. So she will go to the general area where she wants them, send them off. They will go out in bed, and that helps them be safer. What they will do then is 3 to 4 times during the day, she will go back to that general area and will call them. It's a very soft mew, like a meow, meow. The fawns will hear that and they'll stand up. They will come to her. And for about the first month, if there's twins, they will bed in separate areas. They get up, they come to her. She will go ahead and nurse them and then send them back off to hide again. So for that first month, fawns spend a lot of time by themselves. And they are so adept at hiding from predators that for those first couple of weeks, even if a predator gets near them, they can literally slow their heart rate down. Slow the breathing down, slow the heart rate to make it even more difficult for a predator to hear them, smell them, or be able to find them. So they are really, really good at staying alive. Once they pass that 4 to 6 week period, man, they can get away from most predators at that point. So that's the most critical time for them. Coyotes, bobcats, bears, or anything else, a 6-week-old fawn is almost impossible to catch. So they will feed for the first couple of months like that with their mother. After about 2 weeks, though, their stomach will start being able to ruminate, which means they can go and eat vegetation as well. So they're still nursing, but they're going to start eating clover, forbs, twigs, and and other broadleaf species as well, like their mothers. And fawns can be weaned after about 10 weeks of age. So think about this. Think when fawns are born in your area. I'm in northern Pennsylvania. Almost all the fawns are on the ground by June 1st. That means 10 weeks later, by mid-August, almost all of our fawns are weaned. That's almost a month and a half before our deer season starts. So a lot of deer seasons are timed such that the majority of fawns, they've been weaned for a while before that season ever starts. That's just being really good deer managers and how all that lays out. However, fawns will often continue to nurse for months after that. I am convinced this is just to bond with their mother, you know, and a mother-daughter or mother-son bonding. The picture you see here, I took this on our Pennsylvania farm. The date is correct. This fawn was born sometime in May. You can see it's about as big as its mother. The date on that is November 7th. So this fawn is still nursing on November 7th, way after it could have been weaned. So that still does happen, which is the thing, you know, that's just a whitetail behavior. And this happens across the whitetails range as well. Well, I share this picture here and I title it as Mother of the Year. Man, I had a great mother. My wife is a great mother, and I'm sure there's lots of great mothers watching here tonight. However, what's going on here is you take a look, this fawn is nursing. So its mother is feeding it, but there's a lot more going on than just that. For about the first month, fawns can't urinate or defecate by themselves. But what that means is for them to do that, the mother has to stimulate them. She stimulates them by licking their genitals. So when she does this, they will urinate and defecate so that the mother will then usually consume those urine and feces. This is a great way to not have that scent out there for predators to find where they are. But there's also some research to suggest that as the mother consumes those, if there's any bacteria in the fawn's body that's hurting it, by the mother ingesting it, her body can then develop antibodies to protect against it. And then she feeds it back to the fawn in the next nursing. So how cool is that? So definitely Mother of the Year. And there's a whole bunch going on more than just a transfer of milk when we see this. All right, so that's fawns. Let's talk about some of the does here. In peak body condition, does will become sexually mature as fawns. They can breed that first year as 6 to 8 month old individuals. However, most of them won't breed until they're a yearling, which is a year and a half old. However, as fawns, if they hit 70 to 80 pounds live weight, they will become sexually mature and breed. And as deer managers, we monitor the percentage of fawns in any given area that do breed, because that's a great index to herd health. The higher percentage of fawns that hit that weight means they have higher quality food, there's more food available, higher quality habitat, etc. So that gives us a really good clue on, does the habitat have more deer than it can support, or you know, is there enough food there for what's on the landscape? So very important information. However, most of them will breed for the first time at 1.5 years of age. And when they do come into heat, it lasts for a day to a day and a half. So when a doe comes into heat, she is receptive for 24 to 36 hours, and bucks will breed her repeatedly during that time. And in fact, a lot of times bucks will stay with her before she's in heat. So they may be with her, you know, for a day or two. She comes into heat, they may breed her for a day or day and a half before they leave. So this is why this breeding ecology is very different from elk or Canada moose, in that a lot of the does are bred over a pretty short period of time, which means a lot of the bucks out there get in on some of the breeding. If she doesn't get bred that first cycle, she'll cycle again in about a month. And once she does become pregnant, 195 to 200 days later, that fawn will be born. And we can actually measure fetuses for does that are killed late in the hunting season or in the spring, you know, say road killed. If we know the day the deer died, we can measure those fetuses on a special fetal scale developed by Joe Hamilton, who was the founder of QDMA. And from that, know the exact day that doe was bred. And then we can foredate and figure out the exact day that fawn would be born. So if you do that from a bunch of deer in an area, this is what allows you to know exactly when the peak rut occurs. And nearly every state wildlife agency in the country has done this at some point. So they have a really good feel for exactly when peak breeding occurs. Well, once those does are bred, healthy adult does will typically have 2 fawns each year. Even if they're really, really healthy, triplets are pretty rare. It has happened, but that's very rare, even in the, you know, our real agricultural areas where does are just getting incredible nutrition. Does that breed for the first time, they typically will have 1 fawn. And that's, you know, whether they're bred as a fawn or whether bred as a yearling. But by the time they're 2.5, they're pumping out twins almost every year, unless they're malnourished and just simply can't support that. Well, let's talk about a little bit of a territory here, because we often think of bucks as being territorial and pushing other deer around. Bucks are never territorial. The only time that whitetails are truly territorial are does, and it's when fawns are hitting the ground. You see these does here standing up, battling, and this is how does will fight, stand up, and they'll box each other. The dominant does will select the best fawning areas, and then it goes right down the pecking order until the least dominant doe gets the worst area to have her fawn. This is why, from a habitat management standpoint, it's good to have good fawning areas spread throughout the range. Doesn't do us good to have it all in one corner of a property, because fewer does will be able to use it, because they will absolutely kick other deer out of there, kick fawns out, other does, and even adult bucks out of these areas when fawns are hitting the ground. All right, let's shift gears in here for a minute, and we'll go ahead and talk about bucks. Like does, under peak body condition, buck fawns may be capable of breeding, but most of them are not going to breed until they're 1.5 years old. I have seen fawns that are sexually mature. When I was in grad school, I ran the deer research unit at the New Hampshire, the University of New Hampshire's deer facility. Even though buck fawns may be sexually mature, a lot of times they just aren't tall enough to connect all the parts, if you know what I mean. I had a doe in our research facility that had injured herself. I took her out of a pen that the bucks were in, put her in a pen of only fawns, come out the next morning, and there literally was a buck fawn on her back, knowing what was going on, just not tall enough to make it happen. Another buck fawn on his back. There was 3 buck fawns in a row on each other. This is way before the days of cell phones or when everybody had a camera, so I didn't have a picture of it, but I think that was absolutely the definition of frustration for those poor buck fawns. Proud as heck that they had a doe in their pen that no other bucks could get to, but just not quite tall enough. So I don't think a lot of buck fawns are actually breeding in the wild. Most of this is happening once they become 1.5 years old. They're going to go ahead and grow then and reach maximum body size, usually somewhere between 5 and 6 years of age. The better food they get, they will reach it at the lower end of that. If they're nutritionally stressed, it'll take it a little longer, but then they usually attain their maximum antler growth somewhere between 5 and 7 years. And this is because the first foods that they get in the spring will go to replenish all the weight they lost last winter. Next foods kind of go to body growth for the year, and then what's left over goes for antlers. So once they are done growing body-wise, that just allows more food to go to their antlers. And usually when they're in this age range, following an easy winter is when they will grow their largest set of antlers. Well, from a reproduction standpoint, with the exception of deer that are around the equator, those deer will literally breed year-round. Whitetails are considered short day breeders. What this means is in the fall, when we get less daylight each day, that's that decreasing photo period. This is what triggers everything to occur in bucks, then to set up for the breeding season. So less sunlight each day, the eyes detect this, send a message to the brain. This then stimulates the reproductive organs, and testosterone levels rise. When those rise, those antlers that are in velvet and are all soft, this is what causes them to mineralize, the antlers to harden, and then the velvet to shed. And this is when all the good stuff starts to really happen in the deer woods. So peak breeding is in November for almost all whitetails in the range. That means most fawns are born in May and June. And this is important because if they have to be born then, if they're born earlier, a lot of time there's not enough vegetation to feed their mother to have good milk for them. If they're born later than this, then they're at a big disadvantage. They can't grow as long before winter sets on. So this is timed very critically relative to what environmental conditions are, and is why almost every whitetail population peak breeding will occur in November. The exceptions to this are in the southeastern U.S., and there is ruts all over the place. There literally are deer rutting over 7 different months in the southeastern U.S. There's actually Florida alone. You can be hunting rutting deer in Florida right now if you're in South Florida. And literally for the next 7 months, hunt a rutting population of deer down there in the Sunshine State. This has been shown now. A lot of this has to do with genetics. And when deer were restocked back in the early 1900s, they were moved from all over to different states. The lineage from where they're from, they tend to maintain those same breeding dates. So outside of the map that you see right here, your deer are going to peak breeding is going to be in November. And then within this range, it can be pretty chaotic, which if you have the ability to travel, it's pretty cool that you can hunt a rutting buck somewhere over a whole bunch of months. And if something you can do now, maybe something to make for a rutcation trip in the future. All right, at the other end of the spectrum, when they drop their antlers, this is in response to increasing photoperiod. So think it's in the fall, decreasing photoperiod, testosterone levels rise, antlers harden. We get into January, it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. Now we start having more daylight each day. This lets testosterone levels drop, and actually those antlers will fall off, and then we'll start a whole new cycle again next year. The fact that they grow these every year and shed them is just like me or you regrowing an arm or a leg every year. You know, it takes that much nutrition, and it's that taxing on the body. And this is one of the reasons there's so much medical research about this. If we could figure out exactly how deer do this, we could literally regrow limbs in humans. So pretty important from us from a hunting end, from just a wildlife enthusiast end, a lot of interest in the medical field as well. All right, so we know how they grow, we know when they shed. Let's talk about all the cool stuff that happens in between. When they start growing those antlers, or I'm sorry, when they shed those antlers, they often will then group up and they get into these bachelor groups. And many times bucks stay in these bachelor groups from winter all the way until they shed that velvet the next summer. So in most places, they're still in them right now. So you have an opportunity all summer to watch these groups of bucks in these fields or in the woods. They're separated from the does. They don't want to be around them when they're starting, raising those fawns. Testosterone levels are low, so they're like a bunch of good buddies. They can all hang out at the bar. Everybody's happy. This is a typical bachelor group of bucks. What we're looking at here, each of these dots is a GPS location of a radio collared buck. We see yellow dots and purple dots and blue dots, all these different colors. These are multiple bucks that are just all in together. And this is often what we see during the summer months. However, like we said earlier, not every deer is the same. They all have their own personalities. Not all bucks get into these bachelor groups. Here we have a couple of different bucks that are separated from all the other deer out here. So all these different dots you see are different deer who are GPS radio collared, and so they know exactly where these animals are. So the more GPS collars we have and the more studies, we just learn more and more about personalities, about movement patterns, etc. So we used to think that all bucks got into bachelor groups, and we know now that's not the case. Some just tend to be more loners. All right, so hard antler. Once the velvet sheds, this is the time to begin preparation for the upcoming breeding season. And one of the first things we often see is sparring. So we're going to talk about a bunch of behaviors right now. Sparring will typically occur from just before they get rid of that velvet until just before the peak of breeding. This is not fighting. This is not the big time knockdown, drag down stuff. These are deer kind of putting their antlers together a little bit, pushing each other around, just kind of figuring out what is going on. And essentially, bucks can't see what they have. They're not like Bambi. They're not looking in the pool, or that creek and saying, oh man, I got a nice set of antlers today. They can't see them. The nerves in there give them an idea of what they have, but they don't know exactly. But if I can look at what this buck has, I think I know what I have. They put their antlers together, push each other a little bit. It allows them to figure out exactly what they do have on their head. Often, subordinate bucks, they will then lick the forehead gland. They'll lick the face of a dominant buck. Basically, they are making sure that they know exactly who that is. We do this with sight. If you know somebody is bigger or badder or tougher than you, we can look at that. Deer don't do that visually. They do that through olfaction. So they can look, okay, this guy's bigger. Let's make sure that I know exactly what he smells like. So if I come across him later in the breeding season, I'll know that I am below him on that pecking order. So they're pushing a little bit, the sparring, and essentially what they're doing, they develop this pecking order, just like dogs, just like chickens, just like a lot of animals. They don't want to fight. They stand chance of getting hurt or killed. So before the breeding season, if they have this very well-defined pecking order, that lets them establish, okay, dominance. If a doe's in their area, who gets the right to be with her? So this is the sparring part of it. Well, as the breeding season comes on, that escalates. Now we get into some of these dominance fights. And these will typically occur right during the peak of breeding or just after that. This is not the sparring or pushing around. These are the big time knockdown, drag down fights. And with these, it's almost always by middle age or older bucks. The real young bucks often aren't doing this. So it's often by bucks that are at least 3 or older. The confrontation is almost always over a doe. And these are violent. They're vigorous. They can injure one of the bucks. They can kill one or both of the bucks. And I'm sure you've all seen pictures today of where we see, bucks that have been injured, or one buck will gore another buck. So these can be spectacular to see. And at times they can be pretty deadly to the deer. Now, if I said that they don't want to do this, how do these happen? You know what? These are often between bucks that don't know each other. They're bucks that are traveling outside of the normal home range during the rut. So they didn't have the ability to develop that pecking order prior to the rut. They're in the rut. There might be a hot doe in the area. They're looking at another deer. They don't know them. They seem to be about the same size. It's unlikely that animal is going to back down. And this is where we often get to see some of these incredible fights. All right. Well, one of the ways that deer are communicating here are through rubs. Rubs peak during the pre-rut, and they will maintain that level all through the breeding season. And in fact, anytime bucks are in hard antler, they will rub trees. We used to think that these rubs were a way for bucks to just get that velvet off their antlers. And certainly they will use it for that, but these are so much more meaningful. The second most important gland from a communication standpoint on a deer is their forehead gland. Tarsal glands are number one, forehead glands are number two. So what bucks will do on these trees, they will rub their antlers. They are breaking that cambium layer, and that can release some aromatics from that tree. They will then rub their forehead gland on this tree. It's like leaving their business card there for other bucks that come in the area to come and check out. So this is a signpost. Bucks will see these. They will go and check to say who has been here. Which deer do I know? Which deer don't I know? So it's a way for deer to communicate. And they're really, really good at communicating this way. These are great places to put a trail camera because of that, because a lot of deer in an area will check these out. It's like the bulletin board at your local fire hall or your local post office. In many cases, dominant bucks, they can express their social or their physical superiority at these by some of the scent that is left there. University of Georgia researchers have identified up to 50 different pieces of information that deer can leave about themselves through that forehead gland. They don't know what all of that means, but there's many different pieces they can find. Deer can identify each of those as well, so they can tell what is there. And this is why on some of these larger rubs, they are rubbed year after year after year. It's just a great place that the deer in the area know we're going to go there and leave some information, see who's in the area, and get the scoop on what's happening. I was working in southern Kansas several years ago with a friend. We're looking at his property. He runs a lot of cameras. We saw this in the distance. And I said, you put a camera on that telephone pole? And he said, I don't. I said, why not? And he said, I don't know. You think we should? I said, absolutely. Let's go take a look at it. So we go there and look at the bottom of this. I said, if I only had one camera, I would put it here. Every deer in the area, I promise you, is going to come and rub on this. Check out and see what's going on. So it is the perfect place. It's the watering hole. It's the bulletin board or whatever. This is where they're coming. I've seen this all across the Whitetails range. This is a fence post from North Dakota. I've seen these in Illinois. I've seen these throughout the Northeast, the Southeast, etc. So great way for deer to be able to communicate with each other. Well, the other way that they primarily communicate are through scrapes. And this is another signpost behavior. This will peak just before the period of peak breeding, and it involves a very unique sequence of events. The first is that they're going to mark an overhanging branch, and this is often called the licking branch because they will rub their preorbital gland on it. They often will mouth it, lick it, they'll smell it. They get just the right smell on there that they want. That is their calling card. They might rub their forehead gland as well, so it's just the way that they want. Then they paw the ground underneath. If you take a look at this buck here, he's not stargazing. He is smelling a licking branch to see who has been here before me. He is standing in a scrape. The next step then is they will paw the ground, remove all that litter below it, so we get just right down to exposed dirt. And you know what? One of the best ways to attract deer is just to have exposed dirt. If you're in an agricultural situation where there's lots of dirt, yeah, not so much. But if you're in an area where everything is vegetated, whether that's in fields, woods, or whatever, if you just expose some dirt, deer will absolutely come and check that out. So these bucks are going to go ahead, they're going to paw that away, and then they will urinate in it. And this is leaving their scent there. And they will either do this through rub urination, which is where they rub their back legs together and they're urinating over those tarsal glands. That's the dark gland that you see on the inside of his back leg. They will either urinate straight into the scrape or over their tarsal glands. They allows them to carry their scent with them. This is basically their Old Spice or their Brute or their Polo, depending on how old you are. But this is their calling card. These are the best places, in my opinion, to monitor a bunch of deer in an area, because piles of deer will come in and see who has been at the scrape. We often see scrapes at the edge of fields where they meet woods, but it's not just there. We can find them in the woods as well, where two different age classes of woods come together. And essentially, this is where deer often like to travel. We talk about them being an edge species, which is right where two vegetation type meet, whether that's woods, field, open, whatever the case is. Where those two different vegetation types meet is a perfect place to find deer scrapes. And if there's not scrapes there to monitor, you can make your own scrape. Literally move the vegetation out. You can put some urine in there if you want. I often use my own urine. Deer can't tell the difference, or they don't care about human urine versus deer urine. And there's a really cool study from Penn State several years ago where they used buck urine, doe and heat urine, new car smell in these scrapes, and found out that human urine and new car smell attracted just as many bucks as doe and heat urine. So it's that exposed dirt with a scent in it that they're coming there. So you can start your own mock scrape with these, and then other deer will come in and use them. So with these scrapes then, just hold on, just jump to the end here. With these scrapes, they're great places to monitor deer, but we need to realize that, you know what, a lot of times bucks and does will check these out from a distance, just downwind. This particular buck is below this scrape, the little tree that you see in front of this little sapling that's broke off. There's a scrape right there. This buck is below it, never did come and check it out, or never did leave any information there anyway. He collected information. He got to smell who was in the area, but because that scent can stay there, depending on next time it rains or the environment condition, it may stay there a few days. They don't have to be in the scrape every time to leave their scent or to check it out. So a lot of times they're in the area, not necessarily standing right inside that scrape. So we know that bucks come here, but you know what? Does do this as well. Does will routinely visit scrapes. This doe is smelling the licking branch over this autumn olive. There's a scrape below it. And a lot of times does will even leave their information there. Just like bucks exchanging who's in the area, does will do exactly the same thing. This doe has been to the scrape. She smelled the licking branch. She smelled the dirt, and then she went ahead and urinated in as well. So great way to be able to keep tabs, with each other. So from a hunter end, great way to be able to keep tabs of deer that are in the neighborhood as well with these. If you have the ability, particularly during the rut, to have a hot doe in an area, it is amazing how many bucks will come to these areas. I wrote this article for our Quality Whitetails magazine a few years ago. This actually scrape was not that far from our hunting camp, within a couple 100 yards. And it'd been kind of a slow deer season. A bunch of the guys complaining, we're not seeing anything, or we haven't seen many bucks. I had this camera out during this whole conversation, checked it a few days later, and there must have been a hot doe in this area, because over the course of 13 days, there was 88 pictures here of 20 different bucks, all within 200 yards of our camp. It's a pretty nice deer to boot. So they were all there to see who had been to the scrape, who was leaving information. So peak of the rut in Pennsylvania for sure. Good chance there was a hot doe, a lot of bucks in the area. That doe probably was staying close by. Maybe she urinated in this scrape, but lots of activity right here. So, and we saw very few of these bucks during this time, but a great way to realize that, doesn't matter how good of a hunter you think you are, in many cases, there's a lot of things going on there that we don't quite get to see. So, so scrapes are pretty cool from a deer travel standpoint. So if that's the case, then if they are a great place and all these deer are checking them, are they a great place to hunt over? Well, in many cases, the answer is no. Research shows that about 84% of all scrape behavior or scrape occurrences occurs at night. So, they're going to be there at night. Now, I'm sure there's folks out here saying, you know what, I've killed deer over scrapes and I love to hunt those scrapes. And if that's the case, keep hunting them. I'm not going to argue with success. I'm just letting you know that in a lot of cases, those deer aren't visiting them until nighttime. But that doesn't mean we can't use these to our advantage from a hunting standpoint, because if we know a deer often is going to visit them maybe in the morning just before daylight, then they're going to be going back to bed. Well, we don't have to hunt over the scrape, but if we know where a bunch of scrapes are and we know where good cover is, we can set up in between those and catch them coming back from those scrapes. Same thing at night. If we know where that cover is and where they may be scraping, rather than sitting on the scrape, let's sit closer to where they might be bedded, catch them coming there. They may not make it to the scrape until after dark, but let's be smart and intercept them during shooting hours. So even though that they may not be there during daylight, we can definitely use the locations of those scrapes and a little bit of knowledge about deer behavior to be able to cross paths with one during the hunting season. So with that, we've covered a bunch of ground relative to deer behavior between the sexes and all that. I've left a bunch of time here to make sure that we have questions. Hopefully this information can help you get a little closer to whitetails this fall. And maybe if you just hunt them with a camera, hopefully this will allow you to get a little closer with that as well. But anyway, make it a little smarter about deer, a little better deer steward in the process. And with that, Jared, so I'll go ahead, stop sharing here, and be happy to answer any questions that we can. And the last thing I'll say that anything that we don't get to answer tonight, I am happy to answer after this. My email address is kip@deerassociation.com. That's Kip with 1P. I'm happy if you want to email me anytime to ask deer or habitat related questions. By all means, I'm happy to address that for any of the onX users. So with that, Jared, hopefully we have some good questions.
Heck yes, Kip. That was wildly informational. There's a bunch of people showing their appreciation for your knowledge in the chat here. So thank you for that presentation and pulling that out of Deer Steward 1. Again, I'll give another Deer Steward 1 plug here. If you found this insightful, interesting, helpful, this, I'm telling you, this is just scratching the surface of what DS1 has. There is a ton in that program. I dropped a link above in the chat, so go check that out if you haven't yet. I'm also going to drop the giveaway link in the chat right now. So just did that. Please click on that link. Oh, looks like it's in there twice. So that's only going to be live for the next 12 hours. So make sure you just click on that, fill it out right now if you want to get entered to win that deer school seat as well as some onX gear. With that, we're going to kick it over to some questions here. All right, first one. This one came in from the email registration. What does research show about pressure and mature bucks? How susceptible are they to leaving their core areas due to pressure? I know not totally related to what we talked about, but I think that one is going to be of interest to many here.
That's a great question. Lots of research on this. And basically what's happened is those deer are not going to leave their home range. That's where they know how to, to be safest. That's where they feel most secure. So they're not going to leave their home range. But what happens is they change their behavior relative to when they move. And as soon as we start pressuring them, all deer react to that. Mature bucks tend to react very quickly so that they just spend less time moving during the day, more time moving at night, or, they just move less distance during the day. So you're not chasing them. They're not going a mile down the road, or to the next county. But as soon as they know they're being hunted, they are way harder to kill.
Yep. Would wholeheartedly agree with that one. All right. So we just got done talking about scrapes and rubs and particularly with some trail camera locations. Beyond scrapes and rubs, what are some areas that you are focusing on putting trail cameras in the woods you're hunting, Kip?
Boy, right now in the summer, I use, and I'm a huge trail camera fan. I have them on a lot of food sources right now. Well, when deer are in their summer home range, that's the smallest amount that they move during the year. It's basically feed and bed. And if you have good cover near food, they don't go very far at all. So in the summer, I concentrate on good food sources. Once we get into the fall from a hunting end, I will still have some on food sources. I transition more though to trails and areas in between the two. I used to keep them on food sources, be there checking them, and ended up putting a lot of pressure on those deer. So I think that I'm a little smarter now relative to where I have them. So I don't need to have them right on food, but if I know about where they're going to be feeding, and if I've done some good habitat work or scouted public land and found out where good cover is, I concentrate more now on the areas in between those two. I tend to bump less deer when I'm in those areas, and that's tend to be where I hunt more now anyway. So those tend to be great areas. I may not get as many pictures of deer as right over a food source, but I think I'm a lot smarter about some of the deer that are in the area, and it keeps me from putting more pressure on them. And I think that's very valuable as we get into the deer season.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, especially this time of year, a water source can be a great spot for a trail camera, especially if that's a limited resource in your area. And then one other area I really like is like a well-used fence crossing, which are typically pretty obvious. You know, maybe there's one of the four strands is down, or you know, it's a fence post is bent over, making it just an easier jump. Or if there's an opening in the fence, those can also be great spots for trail camera.
You know what? That's a great spot, Jared. And I'll actually add to that. If it's along a fence and you want a deer, and I have done this numerous times, if there's a certain area you would like them, I have actually taken the top two wires and actually tied them together a little bit to create a little bit of a down or a little bit of a dip in one part of it. If it's your own fence, you certainly can. If it's not your fence, get permission before you do this, but you can absolutely make deer cross in a certain spot like that because they will use whatever's easiest. And I've done that numerous times to direct movement either around a stand. I haven't done it for a trail camera, but same concept. So yeah, great point that you made there.
Yeah, and I hung out some cameras last week, and I made a big old deadfall pile. As there's this one trail that kind of wide out on me, so I made it less of a Y. So yeah, trying to funnel deer movement with trail camera sometimes is also advantageous. Oh, here's an interesting one. How much water does a mature whitetail need to drink in a day?
Deer need a bunch of water, and this is going to depend on the season. In the winter, they need very little water. In the summer, they need a lot. And this is especially true for does when they're lactating. That's the most energetically expensive thing that the deer can do is produce milk for fawns. That's way more energetically expensive than even growing antlers. So time of year will depend on how much they need, but deer get water in three different ways. They get water that they drink, just free water, you know, spring or creek, pond or whatever. They get water from vegetation they eat. And during the summer, vegetation tends to be high in moisture content. And water is a byproduct of digestion. So as they're eating, one of the things that happens as they digest that food is water is given off. It's called preformed water. They get water that way as well. So that will satisfy some of their requirements. That's why, you know, deer in arid areas certainly need a bunch of free water. The vegetation just doesn't have enough to supply them. In a lot of the US, though, deer can achieve much of their water requirements through the food they're eating during the spring and summer. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to drink water if it's available, and they absolutely will, and they would prefer, you know, to be able to go to a spring, a creek, or whatever. So with the actual amount that they need, just know that during the summer, it's a bunch more. Fortunately, they can get more of that from the food, but if we can provide water sources, particularly water sources that are slow moving, those are what deer like more than anything else.
Interesting. All right. So a doe having fawns from multiple different bucks. Is that possible? Is it, you know, something that you guys have looked into? Tell us what you know about, you know, twins being fathered by different bucks.
Yeah, absolutely possible. Bear biologists have known this for a long time. You climb into a bear den in January, pull out 3 cubs, there's a good chance there's going to be at least 2 different fathers there. For the whitetail world, for the longest time, we just thought, you know, those twins were true twins, same father. Well, we know now that's not true. And in fact, about 25% of twin fawns are not true twins. They have different fathers. And the reason for this is, remember when I showed that doe slide and said when they come into heat, they'll stay in heat for 24 to 36 hours, and they can be bred repeatedly during that. Well, what we see is that when a doe is in heat, you don't have to be the biggest, baddest buck in the area. You just have to be the biggest buck that's right with her. And in many cases, small bucks, yearling bucks are the only buck that's around. They will go ahead and breed her. Then, you know, she conceives for that fawn. Then at some point during the next 24 to 36 hours, another buck, say a bigger one, comes into the area, displaces that little buck. He breeds her. She has another fawn. So unlike humans, where the way the eggs work, it's very different in fawn or in deer. So she can be bred by different bucks during one estrus cycle and have fawns by different fathers. And research has shown it's about 25%. So yeah, 1 out of 4 sets of twins aren't true twins. They have different fathers. So pretty cool.
That is wildly fascinating and not something that was on my radar at all. I just assumed twins were twins. All right, this one kind of revolves around camo and goes back to when you were talking about, the importance of white on deer. With so many different camo patterns, you have like the more quintessential real tree that has parts of trees and leaves. You have mossy oak bottomland, which is kind of like a blend of bark, but then you have, like a first light pattern, which is, a smorgasbord of created elements. What, in your opinion, and the studies that you guys have done, I know you've worked with some professors on deer eyesight, what is best to wear as far as camo? And are you trying to blend in as the human eye can see it, our eye test, deer camo in the tree, or is there something else that we should be looking at based on a deer's eyes perspective in when you're trying to match your camo to your background?
Yeah, a lot of hunters buy camo based on what they think looks cool. Certainly nothing wrong with that. I've wore a lot of camo in the past that I thought looked really cool too. But if you want to be most effective, we need to look at this from a deer's perspective. Deer see very differently than we do. First of all, deer are essentially red-green colorblind, meaning they don't see the reds and oranges like we do. They appear green to deer, green or gray. So there's no issue with wearing fluorescent orange. Now, however, with regard to the actual pattern, deer don't have the same visual acuity that we have. Since deer, they have a real wide pupil, they see over a big, broad area, and they're detecting movement. You and I can look at the screen, and I can look right into your eyes or right on your hat, or we can see something very small. Deer can't do that. They don't have that visual acuity. So if you're wearing a camouflage pattern that has a tree on it, you and I can see the tree. The deer don't see that as a tree because they can't detect that. So based on what they can see, it's way better to have a collage of a bunch of different shapes and colors intermixed. That more than anything else is going to fool a whitetail's eye. They can't see a specific leaf. Even take an acorn. Deer don't eat an acorn because they see it. Deer eat that acorn because they smell that and then find it. So that pattern is what's important, and how that camouflage is made. So much of today's camouflage starts with a white garment and the camo pattern is overlaid on top of it. Remember when I said deer can see so good into the blue wavelength and those whites? They often can see some of that through that pattern. So you and I, it looks dark and mottled, not to a deer. They can see that light coming through that. So I like a pattern that's different shapes and sizes, different colors meshed together, and something that is not created over, a piece of white garment when it starts. So those are the big things that will help you fool a whitetail's eyes.
Very interesting on the over a white garment, because I think to your point there, a lot of the more budget friendly camos are typically made over a white garment.
That's exactly how they're made. You and I can't tell that, but deer absolutely can.
And our good buddy Ben, also an NDA employee, just dropped the facts about deer vision in the chat. So you guys, if you're interested more on the deer vision, you guys can get it straight from the source right there at that link in the chat. Appreciate that, Ben. Deer's normal body temp, what is it?
Oh man, this is going to go way back to grad school. I don't remember exactly. I think it's a little higher than ours. I think it's right around that 100 to 101 range. Man, I don't know. I've been out of school for too long. I don't remember that one. Although I'm 99% sure it's a bit higher than ours.
All right. Well, whoever answered that one, good work. You stumped Kip on that.
You definitely stumped me on that one.
All right. We threw in another link for the giveaway, so make sure you fill that out if you haven't already. We're going to ask Kip just a couple more questions here, and then we're going to bid everyone adieu for the evening. Let's see here. Primary food sources for the early season. What would you rank, stack rank, call it an October 1st opener? What food source are you going to be hunting on opening day?
Man, that's right about the time that the deer are breaking up or leaving their summer home range and moving kind of into their fall range. So, in October, that's when a lot of those food groups, they're shifting. We have seen deer all summer, in these ag fields and feeding, the edges of the woods. Once we hit October, if that ag is still available, they are certainly still doing that, but they start to move a little bit and shift. So early season for me, and in Pennsylvania, our season always starts the end of September, beginning of October. Any summer ag crops, I'm there. They're still hitting soybeans. They're still hitting clover. Absolutely. They're still hitting alfalfa fields for sure. If you're not in an agricultural area, if anything that's old field varieties, so things that are herbaceous and broadleafed in nature, and these grow all over the whitetails range. These are the goldenrods, the jewelweed, the pokeweed, the ragweed. Any of those herbaceous plants absolutely are dynamite that time of year. If you are not in any of those areas that's totally forested, I'm looking for areas that are very young forest. They want leaves from younger plants, because think about this, that stump that is providing all of the nutrients and minerals for a whole tree. Once that tree is cut, all those stump sprouts, you still have the same root system pumping the same amount of nutrients, except you just have a fewer amount of leaves. So every leaf is way higher quality than those high ones are. So in those cases, if I'm in a heavily forested environment, I'm looking for very young leaves, and certainly stump sprouts are perfect candidates to be able to find those.
Great intel. All right, last one here. Mineral licks. What is the importance to buck's antler growth, doe fawn health, as far as supplemental things that you can provide those deer on your property?
Man, a lot of talk about minerals. There has never been a study that has shown that minerals have helped wild deer at all. There's lots of studies that show they help captive deer. There's been lots of studies that show they help livestock, but none that show that they put anything on live deer. And I think the reason for this, well, I know the reason for this. There's been a lot of recent studies that looking at the mineral contents of broadleaf plants. Basically, when we're looking at antler growth, we're talking about calcium and phosphorus. And the maximum amount of calcium and phosphorus that deer can use, the calcium and phosphorus in many of the broadleaf plants that we have are way above the maximum amount that deer have. Given that deer focus on these broadleaf plants, and that's what they pick over grasses, is that what explains why deer are getting this stuff naturally. Now, it doesn't mean deer don't like minerals. Deer love minerals. It's like kids and candy. They don't need that candy, but they certainly will eat it. So there's lots of research that shows you can attract deer using minerals. I use minerals on our farm to put deer in front of a camera. I no longer fool myself to think that I'm making deer heavier or bigger antlers with them. This works in cattle because cattle primarily eat grasses. Grasses are inherently very low in those minerals. Captive deer, they don't have the ability to go and select for all these broadleaf plants that wild deer do. So minerals absolutely help captive deer as well. But I'm convinced that this is why in the wild, we don't see these big benefits. Doesn't mean you shouldn't use them. Well, if you're in a disease zone, you shouldn't use them because it's a great way for deer to transfer diseases. But minerals are a great way to be able to see what is there from a camera standpoint or for viewing. Use them for that. Don't pretend that you're going to make deer have bigger antlers or heavier body weights with them, but certainly can attract deer to cameras with them. And that's exactly what I use them for. Make sure you have lots of broadleaf plants out there, and then deer are getting all the minerals that they need, or at least above or up to the maximum amount that they can use.
Yeah, and if the last 2 minutes of what Kip just said is interesting to you, you absolutely must go watch Dr. Craig Harper's presentation that we did maybe 2 weeks ago with the Masterclass, because wow, did he drop some knowledge on old fields and the overall benefit that those broad leaves and forbs provide versus even food plots and mineral licks and all that stuff. So onX Hunt YouTube has that for you. The giveaway link is in the chat one last time. Kip, can't thank you enough for hopping on here. Greatly appreciate the knowledge and info you've shared. Everyone out there, thanks for attending. We hope to see you on the next one, and best of luck as whitetail seasons come into play here over the next month.
Hey, thank you, Jared, and thank you everything that onX does for conservation. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.